Children don't lie about things they don't understand, they simply describe what they see. We were sitting at the table, pouring milk over cereal, when my grandson suddenly mentioned that his father did something weird to my car after dropping me home. He said it casually, as if commenting on the weather, but something in his tone made my heart tighten. I smiled and asked gently what he meant, not wanting to scare him. His answer was only four little words, but they changed everything. Those innocent words led me to place a small camera near my garage, and what I discovered the next morning didn't just save my life. It revealed a betrayal so cold it still chills me to remember it. My name is Evelyn, I am 68 years old, and the quiet rhythm of my days is measured in small moments with my grandson. We color together at the kitchen table, bake messy batches of cookies, and walk to the park where he tells me secrets only 6-year-olds can invent. His father often drives me home afterward, saying it's no trouble, and I've always been grateful. I live alone, so the sound of little footsteps running through my house feels like sunlight. I never imagined danger could grow inside something so ordinary. To me, family meant safety, love, loyalty. I trusted the people closest to me perhaps more than I should have, and that makes what happened next even harder to understand. Most afternoons followed the same pattern. He would drop her at the curb, wave politely, and wait until she unlocked the door before driving off. It seemed thoughtful, respectful. Sometimes he even carried groceries inside, making small talk about work while the little boy played with the cat. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. Yet every now and then there was a flicker in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. She brushed it aside, convincing herself she was being silly. After all, he was family. You don't question people you've welcomed into your home until you're given a reason you can't ignore. The morning it happened felt completely ordinary. Cereal, toast. Cartoons humming softly in the background. She joked about how much milk he used and wiped a smear of jam from his cheek. Then, without looking up from his bowl, he said in that innocent, matter-of-fact tone only children have, "Daddy does something weird to your car after he drops you off." The spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Her heart gave a quiet, uneasy thump. She kept her voice light, careful not to scare him, and asked what he meant. Children describe what they see, not what they think. And something in his voice told her this wasn't imagination. He swung his legs under the chair and shrugged. He opens the front part. Four simple words, soft as feathers, but they landed like bricks, the front part, the hood. He mimed lifting it up and twisting something like he was opening a bottle. Then he tells me not to tell, he added, almost whispering. Calm washed over her the way it does before a storm. She smiled, thanked him, changed the subject, but inside, alarms were ringing. Why would he be opening the hood after every visit? And why the secrecy? She kissed the child's forehead and made a silent promise to herself. Find out safely. All day the memory replayed itself. Maybe it was nothing, an oil check, a loose cap, something harmless. But fear has a way of sharpening old instincts. She began paying attention to tiny details she had once ignored. The faint smell of gasoline after short trips, the way he always insisted on parking the car himself, how he disliked anyone else touching the keys. Little fragments that had never formed a pattern suddenly lined up in her mind. She told no one, not yet. Instead, she listened, watched, waited. Sometimes survival begins quietly, not with panic, but with awareness. The next time he dropped her off, she lingered by the porch, pretending to search her purse while keeping him in the corner of her eye. Sure enough, once he stepped inside, he didn't drive away. The engine idled. A moment later, the hood clicked open. She moved silently to the window, heart pounding, and watched him lean over the engine with a small tool, glancing toward the house as if afraid of being seen. He worked quickly, then shut everything and left like nothing happened. Her hands shook. This was no casual oil check. Something deliberate was happening, and she needed proof before confronting anyone. Proof and protection. That night she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold untouched. Fear filled the room like fog, but beneath it lived determination. She went online, ordered a small motion-activated camera, and asked a trusted neighbor to help install it near the garage, angled toward the car, hidden but clear. No drama, no accusations, just quiet evidence. If nothing was wrong, she would sleep easier. If something was, she would know before it was too late. When the package arrived, she held it in trembling hands, whispering a silent thank you for the child who had unknowingly sounded the alarm. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truth. The tiny camera was nearly invisible, tucked safely where no one would ever think to look. That evening, she parked as usual, locked the doors, and waved goodbye. Inside, she pretended to settle in for the night, reading in her armchair while every sense strained toward the driveway. A strange mix of dread and relief washed over her. If nothing happened, she would feel silly but safe. If something did, at least she wouldn't be blind anymore. Hours later, she went to bed with her heart thudding like footsteps in an empty hall, knowing the truth was now beyond opinion. It would be recorded, whatever it was. The next morning, she made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the footage with trembling fingers. There he was pulling up calmly, helping her to the porch with a friendly smile. He waited until the door closed, then his expression changed. He went straight to the front of the car, lifted the hood, and bent over the engine for several minutes, moving with deliberate focus. It wasn't a curiosity, it wasn't kindness, it was my intention. When he finished, he looked toward the house, scanned the street, and drove away as if nothing at all had happened. Watching it unfold in silence was somehow worse than hearing it. This wasn't imagination. Something truly was wrong. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sinks in like cold water, inch by inch. She replayed the footage again, then again, searching for any innocent explanation, but the sick feeling in her stomach only grew. Why would he hide it from her? Why would he involve the child in a lie? Her hands shook so badly she had to set the laptop down. She thought about the strange smells, the uneasy glances, the way he always handled the car himself. A realization began to take shape, terrifying not because it was certain, but because it might be. And if it was true, she needed help immediately. She drove to a trusted mechanic she'd known for years, a quiet man who didn't gossip. Calmly, she asked him to check the car thoroughly. He called her into the office afterward, his face serious. Without sharing technical details, he explained that something crucial had been tampered with, something that could have made the car unsafe at any moment. Not an accident, not wear and tear. A deliberate act. She felt the room tilt. The child's words echoed in her head. The mechanic gently told her the car was now secure, but urged her to be careful. She thanked him, walked outside, and stood in the sunlight that suddenly felt colder than winter. That evening she sat alone in the living room, lights low, the house humming softly around her. The truth lived inside the silence now. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone she trusted had placed her in danger, quietly, repeatedly, without remorse. And the most frightening part was the smile he still wore when he saw her. She thought of her grandson, small, trusting, sitting at the breakfast table, and realized he had unknowingly saved her life. The dread wasn't loud. It just stayed like a shadow that refused to leave. When she began pulling back, refusing rides, choosing taxis instead, the family noticed. Questions came wrapped in concern. "Are you feeling all right? Is something wrong?" He acted puzzled, even hurt, playing the role perfectly. She answered softly, carefully, saying she preferred independence. No accusations, not yet. Meanwhile, the child let slip little details, reminders not to tell, whispers about special car time. Each fragment stitched itself into the truth already sitting in her chest. She moved more cautiously now, locking doors, keeping records, making copies. Trust had become a fragile thing she could no longer lean on. One night, lying awake, it finally settled in completely. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice someone had made again and again while looking her in the eye. And if a person could risk her safety, what else were they capable of? The thought chilled her more than the winter air slipping through the cracks of the window. But beneath the fear grew something steadier, resolve. She would not confront recklessly. She would not panic. She would do this safely, legally, and with undeniable proof, for herself, for the child, for the truth. And as she closed her eyes at last, she whispered a silent promise into the dark. "This ends with me alive, not silent." When she looked back honestly, the tension hadn't appeared overnight. It had begun as small jabs disguised as jokes, impatience when she moved too slowly, a quiet possessiveness over decisions that affected everyone. He liked control, not loudly, but in ways that made others doubt themselves. She had brushed it off as stress, as personality, as anything but what it really was. Now, with the truth settling heavily in her chest, those memories rearranged themselves into a pattern she could no longer ignore. Fear mixed with grief, grief that the man she had welcomed into the family with open arms had seen her not as a person to protect, but as a problem to remove. She remembered the little red flags she'd filed away under not worth a fight. The way he always insisted on handling her paperwork. The way he corrected her stories in front of others, making her feel forgetful. The way he once suggested she shouldn't drive alone anymore for safety. None of it felt alarming at the time. Annoying, yes. Controlling, maybe, but not dangerous. Now, each memory shone like a warning flare she had failed to see. She refused to blame herself. Hindsight always arrives too late to help, but she did promise one thing. From now on, she would trust that small voice inside her chest that whispers, "This doesn't feel right." She didn't know exactly why he had targeted her, but threads of possibility wove themselves together. Money, property, insurance, power. Maybe she represented an obstacle he wanted gone. Or maybe control had simply become a habit he no longer bothered to hide. Whatever the reason, he had smiled in her kitchen while secretly endangering her life, and that truth sank in deeper than any single motive could. Betrayal is cruel not because it's loud, but because it hides behind kindness. And realizing that kindness was a mask felt like stepping into cold water and discovering the floor beneath you is gone. Sleep abandoned her. Some nights she paced the hallway. Others she sat in darkness, hands clasped, listening to the house breathe. Anger came hot and sharp. then sadness, soft and exhausting. But the feeling that returned most often was disbelief. How do you grieve someone who is still alive? She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. Instead, she made tea and breathed through the storm. Strength doesn't always look like bravery. Sometimes it looks like staying calm when your world tilts sideways because panicking might cost you more than you're willing to lose. One thing guided every decision she made: the child, that sweet, unguarded little boy who had unknowingly spoken the truth. She never hinted to him that anything was wrong. She never asked more questions than necessary. Children should not carry secrets that don't belong to them. Instead, she quietly adjusted routines, always meeting at public places, never being alone in the driveway, making sure he was never placed in the middle of adult conflict. Protecting herself mattered, but protecting him, that was sacred. She began creating a careful trail: dates, messages, observations, all kept safely and privately. Not to gossip, not to dramatize, but because truth needs support when challenged. She shared only with professionals she trusted, making sure everything followed the right path. No confrontations, no dramatic scenes, just steady documentation so that, when the moment came, reality would stand on its own 2 feet. Fear might shake you, but facts keep you standing. With every step, her resolve hardened, not into bitterness, but into clarity. She refused to become reckless. She refused to argue with deception. Instead, she chose the quiet strength of someone who knows the truth will eventually speak for itself. She prayed for courage. She leaned on friends who didn't ask invasive questions, just offered presence. And one evening, as the sky faded into deep blue, she looked at her reflection in the window and realized something important. She wasn't just surviving this, she was taking her power back. Gently, lawfully, safely. And the story that began with 4 small words at a breakfast table was now moving toward a reckoning no one could avoid. When the moment finally came, she didn't face it alone. Everything was arranged calmly, carefully, with the right people present so emotions could not spiral into danger. She brought the records, the footage, and the professional report, nothing exaggerated, nothing dramatic, just truth laid out plainly on the table. He arrived confident, expecting another ordinary conversation. But when the facts were presented, a flicker crossed his face: recognition, then calculation. There were no raised voices, no accusations thrown like weapons. She simply said she now understood what had been happening, and that from this moment on, her safety and the child's well-being would come first. The room felt smaller, heavier. For the first time, his charm had nowhere to hide. Shock cracked through the family like lightning. Some gasped, some wept, some refused to believe what they were seeing. He tried to maintain composure, but the illusion wavered. People who had once defended him now sat frozen, struggling to match the man they knew with the actions described. She didn't gloat, she didn't rage. She simply answered questions when asked, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. The child, safely elsewhere and blissfully unaware, became the silent reason everyone understood the gravity of what had been prevented. And beneath the chaos, one truth pulsed steadily: not all danger comes from strangers. He denied it at first, said it was a misunderstanding, exaggeration, coincidence. But denial shatters quickly when it collides with proof. Each time he dismissed something, another piece of verified evidence appeared. Not speculation, not a rumor, facts. He tried to twist the story into concern for her, claiming he'd only been helping. Yet the expressions in the room had changed. People were no longer listening the same way. She didn't argue. Truth doesn't need to shout. And in the silence that followed, the weight of his choices finally landed where it belonged. She followed every safe, official step available to her, quietly, respectfully, but firmly. Professionals took the lead now. She didn't chase confrontation or vengeance. She simply chose distance, documentation, and protection. Barriers were set in place so he could no longer come near her or involve himself in anything related to her daily life. It felt strange at first to erect shields against someone who had once called her family. But as the paperwork was signed and the safeguards settled around her like walls of glass, she felt something stronger than fear for the first time in months: relief. Families don't always fracture loudly. Sometimes they splinter in quiet conversations and sleepless nights. Some members stood firmly beside her, horrified and protective. Others clung to denial, afraid to face what the truth meant. Lines were drawn, not out of spite, but out of necessity. She didn't try to convince anyone. People see when they are ready. Her priority remained the child, ensuring he was safe, emotionally shielded, and never blamed for the words that had saved a life. Love stayed, trust changed. And those two realities had to learn how to coexist. Consequences don't always look dramatic from the outside. They unfold in courtrooms, in lost privileges, in reputations that no longer hold. They appear in calendars filled with mandatory appointments and in doors that are no longer open. He discovered that actions, once hidden, now had a trail, and that trail led to accountability. She didn't celebrate. There is no joy in watching someone fall, even when it is deserved. There is only the quiet understanding that justice is sometimes the last form of protection left. The final goodbye wasn't theatrical. It was careful, supervised, and necessary. She didn't speak long, there was nothing left that needed saying. What hurt most was not losing him, but losing the version of him she had once believed in. Still, she chose to release the illusion rather than cling to a lie. As she walked away, the air felt heavier and lighter all at once. Pain lived beside gratitude, gratitude for a small boy who had spoken the truth without knowing its power, and for the strength she'd found in herself when she needed it most. Some endings don't close gently, but they do close. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support truly means a lot. She learned that safety doesn't start with locks or alarms, it starts with boundaries. And for the first time in her life, she set them clearly. There would be no unannounced visits, no shared access, no private conversations that could twist into confusion. Everything became structured, documented, and calm. She built a circle of trusted people around her, neighbors, friends, professionals, not to live in fear, but to live in confidence. Independence returned slowly, like strength after an illness. She drove again without dread. She laughed again without guilt. And although the wound of betrayal still ached, she understood something powerful. She could care deeply for family and still protect herself. Those two truths could live side by side, and finally they did. Healing didn't happen in a montage. It arrived in small steps, talking, crying, sitting quietly, and letting her nervous system unclench one day at a time. She found a kind therapist who helped her process the shock and loss. There was no judgment, only space to speak freely about fear, anger, love, and grief. She learned to recognize the signs of control. She learned that intuition is not paranoia. And most importantly, she learned that trauma isn't weakness, it's the body trying to keep you alive. The fog began to lift. Sleep returned. Her smile reached her eyes again. She stopped blaming herself for trusting someone who didn't deserve it. Trusting had never been the mistake. Hurting her hand, trust didn't snap back into place. It rebuilt itself like a careful bridge plank by plank. She talked openly with those who stayed by her side, asking for patience when fear resurfaced. They didn't rush her. They didn't push. They simply showed up for tea, errands, quiet dinners, and soft conversations that didn't require bravery. Slowly, she began to believe again that not everyone hides sharp edges. Some people are simply good. And although betrayal had etched itself into her story, it no longer wrote every page. She discovered she could still love wisely, not blindly, and that realization felt like sunlight after a long winter. The child remained blissfully unaware of the storm he had unknowingly calmed. She refused to let the darkness touch him. In his world, he was simply loved, read bedtime stories, walked to school, drawn into safe hugs that smelled like home. No one ever hinted that his small voice had saved a life. Children shouldn't carry that kind of weight. She protected his innocence fiercely, like a candle cupped in both hands against the wind. And sometimes, when he laughed so hard he couldn't breathe, she would close her eyes and whisper a quiet thank you, not for the fear she endured, but for the future he had unknowingly helped preserve. Justice didn't thunder. It moved quietly through official channels, guided by people who understood the gravity of what had happened. There were no dramatic speeches or movie-style confrontations, just paperwork, consequences, and a slow but steady acknowledgement that harm had been done. She didn't seek revenge. She sought safety, truth, and accountability. And when those finally settled into place, she felt the invisible armor she'd been carrying loosen and fall away. What had once felt like chaos now felt like closure, not perfect, not painless, but enough. Life began to look ordinary again, but in a gentler way. Morning tea. Visits with friends, walk through the neighborhood where the trees whisper in the wind. She learned to enjoy quiet without waiting for danger to follow. Her world wasn't smaller now, it was wiser. And with every peaceful day that passed, the distance between her and the nightmare widened until it became something she remembered rather than relived. Looking back, she understood that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply listening to a child's innocent sentence and choosing to believe it. Sometimes it's trusting the uneasy feeling in your chest. Sometimes it's speaking up calmly, safely, persistently, until truth stands on its own. She didn't become harder through this. She became clearer, softer in kindness, stronger in boundaries. And whenever fear tried to creep back in, she reminded herself of the promise she had made in the dark. This ends with me alive, not silent. And it did.